So I've often wondered if other stackers actually keep a running total of what their stack's valued at. I mean, when you first start out, you know how many ounces you have, you know roughly how much you've spent. But once you start to build a sizable stack, that kind of goes right out the window. I mean, think about it. When you've got thousands and thousands of dollars worth of silver, do you really go through and do an inventory? Especially with price, moving constantly, it becomes pretty difficult after a while. So I always think about myself, like one of the great things about stacking, aside from, the collectability, all the other, great aspects to it, is that it allows you to forget how much value you've really stored. Now, the flip side of that is for pure stackers, the ones who buy generic, the cheapest bullion they can find, that's going to be the most straightforward way to, accumulate value. Because, basically you can just take a look at whatever spot is and, maybe factor in an extra $1, $2 over that for how much your stack is worth. But what about, if you become a stack collector, if you have a mix of premium and just absolute coal silver, what happens then? How do you really value your stack? Well, that's an interesting question. And I think, for the most part with larger stacks, it kind of does go out the window. Now, those, there are going to be those people that keep a, an Excel spreadsheet and, tally up exactly how much their stack is worth. But I would say that's probably the exception rather than the rule. Now, if you ask one of my top fans, John Bannon, he will say that he stacks because he's a pure stacker. He doesn't really care about the high premium stuff. He is all about just attaining weight. Price goes up, price goes down, doesn't matter. There's always a benefit plus or minus there somewhere. And I think that probably does permeate a lot in, the stacking community. Now, on that line, if you're a stacker and let's say, one of these scenarios comes true, whether it's the economic collapse or whether it's, silver shortage or silver price just for some reason skyrockets, is there anything that you rule out? Do you rule out anything with silver? Such as, I've always thought about, for example, if let's say a better investment opportunity, let's say property or something else, a business or something like that, came up where you could purchase it, but you needed to get, some of that value from your silver stack. What would you do? My thought would be, especially in a rising premium environment for silver, or rising spot price rather, would you pawn it? Would you ever consider pawning it? I would say definitely, no question about it. Now, the flip side to that is, of course, you're going to pay an arm and a leg in interest, but you'll still control your exact stack. Whereas anytime you actually liquidate, you're taking the chance that you don't get, either the same pieces or whatever back, which is a risk. If you have a pure generic stack, then I guess it's not that big a deal because, eagles are eagles or maples are maples, within reason. Now, again, even that, you think, a few years back, and each of the different, types of bullion, even generic or bullion coins, they do gain additional value as they age, even if it's just, regular bullion. So there's that. So I always wonder, why people put pawn, so far down the list as far as what you would do with your stock. Oh, I'd sell it peer-to-peer. I'd, go take it to the coin shop. But again, even in those scenarios, the coin shop, the pawn shop, whatever, none of that's going to be open if there's a financial meltdown. They're not going to be able to trade you anything because they just don't have cash. How are they going to operate with their other customers if they don't have cash? So they're probably not going to open. They're not going to be keeping the doors open, hoping, silver buyers come in. Secondly, again, and we've talked about this many times, if silver and gold were the way to financial freedom, the be your own bank, why aren't coin dealers some of the richest people you know? They aren't. They're just, most of them, they just kind of live hand to mouth because a lot of it just, low profits on, transactions. They make their money in volume. It's crazy. It's really crazy to think about. But, all of these mantras that we have makes it very difficult to navigate the stacking environment. But I think, the more you think of these things, the more you think them through, especially in times like this, where, again, I've seen that lately the silver's gonna moonshot, and this is why videos start coming back. And I'm sure there's plenty of them out there, but when they start to make it back to my feed, I'm like, oh, it really must starting to get pumped again. I don't know. It could be. I would think that what ends up happening with silver is actually that it goes back down to where it was pre-pandemic at some point. Why? Because if economic activity slows and, at some point, normal economic cycle, recession or slowdown in wage growth, slowdown in employment, well, people just don't have money for, silver, especially bullion, but also electronics, cars, all the other things that require silver. That would tell me that price is going to go down, not up. There's really no catalyst there for silver, even gold, to go higher. Gold, I would feel that, it does hold its value probably a little bit more stable than what silver does. But even so, these are the things that are going through my mind right now, especially because as the stock market turns around, remember, there's a semi-finite amount of money, in circulation. It's always going to chase return if it's not, sitting in cash. So because of that, it's going to find either the stock market or crypto, whatever it's going to be, real estate, business, it's going to go somewhere where it can generate a sufficient return. Given the fact that cash right now is returning 5%, that's pretty tough. That's pretty tough for silver to consistently beat that type of return in this environment. It's going to be interesting. Also, I heard something really interesting that kind of like blew me away when I was thinking about it, because it was so deep that I was like, oh, wow. And it was talking about like capitalism, how, capitalism basically makes it seem that you can, in a set environment, in other words, in a closed system where, you have finite resources, finite assets, finite inputs, that you can somehow from that grow more value, more riches, more profit, instead of just drawing it from the masses and accumulating it in the hands of the few. And it tied that back to biology and saying, like, if you thought of that in the, in terms of biology, what would be the comparable? And the comparable would be cancer. And I was like, wow, that's a very interesting way to think about it, because that's exactly what cancer does. It basically pilfers all the resources, all of the, vitamins, nutrition, all of those things. It steals it from the rest of the system in order to perpetuate itself and its own ends, which is kind of crazy because, we all know that, our system of market capitalism, not pure capitalism, that our system of market capitalism has pros and cons. Particularly if you're in the upper echelon, then, it's mainly pros. But if you're on the bottom end, you're a wage slave like the vast majority of people, not so much. And so basically you're the one that's being taken from to propel the higher echelons of, of value. Very interesting. And I thought about how that ties back to all of this. And, there are a lot of you out there who say, like, this kind of thing is basically, although it may have its own virtues, like for me, like I said, like, it's a great way to save because, it's just basically off the electronic grid where you can't see it. It's just there. But that this is basically like the fool's game to kind of keep you engaged and feel like, you're fighting back against the man, when really, you're diving head first into the system. I thought that was pretty interesting. And I thought that was pretty interesting that, there are those that feel that way, out there. Very interesting. But it's also, again, interesting times as far as money in general. So where does silver and gold fit? You tell me.